thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you, Christopher. Happy to be here.
We're going to dive into Pexip, of course, but if you go back, so can you tell us about the days when you were studying at the university in Trondheim and why you decided to start in McKinsey?
Yeah, happy to. So, as you mentioned, I studied in the university in Trondheim, a combination of really technology and economics. So, a fairly broad exposure and gave me a okay understanding of both technology and business and finance. And so, then as I sort of were at the end and had to decide what to do after university, I was still unsure about sort of which direction to take. And so McKinsey seemed like a great option because it gave me really the freedom to explore a lot of different topics and a lot of different functions. I think at the end, probably the most interesting part of that journey was all of the great people that I got to work with, because it truly was a great environment with a lot of talented colleagues.
When you were working at McKinsey, did you have any industry you worked very close to, or were you a generalist working abroad, so many different industries?
I think I was a fairly sort of generalist in that I worked across several industries. Most of them had something to do with sales, so both in retail, in telecoms, which were sort of the industries that I worked the most with. A lot of the projects were around sales efficiency, pricing, and those sort of topics.
Was that also then the bridge to join Telenor? Or is there a specific story behind that? Or was it just naturally a consultancy from McKinsey and then like opportunity came and you decided to join Telenor?
To be fair, I think it was more that the opportunity came. I think that's really been the sort of common theme, at least in my career, that when interesting opportunities have come up, I try to take them. In Telenor specifically, it was a former colleague that was the head of strategy in a large Telenor business unit, and he needed to expand his team, and so he asked if I was interested in joining. And I think at the time, for me, it was important to go from then really deep diving in a couple of months and learning a lot of interesting things, but not really having any responsibility of actually implementing the stuff that you advise on. For me, it was I was eager to also get my hands on that part of the experience of actually trying to implement and to get the results that you're looking for.
Obviously, Telenor has this incredible story about how they got to be truly an international company. Did you work internationally at Telenor? Did you have any projects abroad?
Some, but most of my focus was really into Telenor Norway. But in that, I got to work with also the other Scandinavian BUs, especially on the B2B side, as well as some of the other European business units. So I got some experiences internationally, although I think my core focus has always been on the Norwegian business.
So tell us about the first time you discovered Pexip. Is it when you are interested in joining them, or is it a previous experience?
So I came across Pexip as a technology a bit before I joined. So I was aware of the company and sort of slightly aware of what they did. But in the end, the really sort of reason for me to join Pexip was to one, after having worked in Telenor for 6 years or so, wanted to have the experience of working in a smaller company. And after having worked mainly with Norway as my focus, also wanted to have that exposure to international business. So I think those were the two main drivers for me wanting to move from Telenor to Pexip. Even though sort of at the time left a substantial team with a huge business area and 50 plus direct employees, to then joining a company which was 90 people overall and really a bit undefined role as the VP of strategy.
Super interesting. If we look at Pexip, can you tell us sort of the founding story? And of course, there has been two companies that has merged into Pexip, but can you tell us sort of the original story dating back?
Yeah, I think Paxip started back in 2012. So at the time, Cisco had acquired Tandberg, which was really an international powerhouse within video conferencing. And out of that acquisition came both Cisco sort of stepping up on their video conferencing side, but also quite a lot of people that over the years have left Cisco to found other companies. Paxip was one of those companies. And the ideas that the founders had was that at the time, video conferencing was really hardware-based. So to have a video conference, you needed to, in addition to having the cameras and soundbars in the meeting rooms, you also needed these big specialized servers in your data center. They took in all of the various video streams from the different cameras and compiled them into one picture that they then sent back, so that you have more than one person on the screen at the same time.
And yeah.
And I think what Pexip saw is that video needs to scale beyond what can be done in these specialized servers, because hardware-based solutions rarely scale really well. So they set out that this has to be a software solution, and it has to be a software solution that can be run in the cloud, so that it can use standard-based or standard processors to do all of these computations that is needed to provide a great video conference. Which, if it was anything but video, would be fairly straightforward. But when you add the requirements in terms of having close to zero latency, because if it takes you half a second from when I say something to you hearing it, it's not a fantastic experience, right? So that was really the sort of core engineering challenge that the Paxip team set out to solve, and did so very successfully.
And then you had the merger a couple of years ago. What was the story behind that one?
So the merger, so back then you had Paxip, who then provided a software-based solution for video conferencing. And you had Videxio, which had, based on that software, built a video conferencing service. So I think Videxio really came out of the same type of need, that video conferencing can't be hardware-based. It needs to be then a software as a service. So they set out to build a as a service offering for video conferencing. Over the time, they became a large customer of Pexip. So the underlying technology and the sort of user experience that you had was similar both for Pexip and for Videxio, but how you consumed it was very different. So when the two companies merged back in 2018, you had really this amazing sort of value proposition that you can get the same great user experience. And if you want to consume it as a software, or if you want to consume it as a cloud service, it's really up to you. So I think that really sort of expanded the reach of both companies, because at the end, it's the same type of customer. It's very often the same type of bid, but then you can serve both alternatives and not have to sort of be hit and miss on half of them because the customer wants a different deployment option.
Quarter is the new way of doing company research. Their first mission is to enable access to conference calls, investor presentations, transcripts, and earnings reports. Their second mission is to create a completely new way for companies to reach their investors and vice versa. Quarter is 100% free. They include companies from 15 markets today and plan to add more. They prioritize requested companies, and users can now leave reactions while listening to the conference calls. So make sure to follow them on Twitter @QuarterApp. Let's go back to you a bit. I mean, obviously, you joined Paxip to sort of join a smaller company, more dynamic, more fast-paced, I guess. And now you're sitting there as the interim CEO after being the CFO. How's that journey been for you personally, and how does it feel to have the CEO role right now?
So I think it's been I think it proves the fact that you can't always plan your career. So being sort of able to take risk and to go for the experiences that you want to have, at least for me, has paid off. I think that's been true both when I joined Paxip, but also in taking on other roles previously in my career. And then it's really been about having joined Pexip, trying to provide more value, finding ways to be useful and helpful to my team, which has helped me then first take on the CFO role back in 2019. And then now that with OS's departure, our former CEO, also then put me in the position to have the interim CEO role.
I read an article where you said that you think your strengths are that you're quite curious and you like to understand things, and also that you like to have your team to make quick decisions and let them experiment. Can you talk a bit about that philosophy you have and how you try to implement that in Paxip?
Yeah, and I think part of the success was really that that's a philosophy that was there in Pexip already. So I think one of our core values has been freedom and responsibility, which means really that even though we have a clear company strategy and a sort of common mountaintop that we all want to climb, how to solve the concrete problems that people come across, they have a lot of freedom to find the best solution. That goes within engineering on sort of how to solve particular problems that they face, and it's also applicable to sales. So how they both structure an offering to the customer and how they can sort of take our fairly standardized product and fit it to fit the unique needs of the customer. They have a lot of individual freedom in doing so. And I think that's really important, because if you want to scale, the world rarely sort of fits a one-size-all methodology, and so you really need a culture where people feel that they have the freedom and also are trained to find the good solutions to the problems they face.
If you look at that sort of the culture you're talking about now, how much do you feel it is about the culture versus the structures and frameworks you have implemented in the company?
I think without that sort of common culture and a common way of doing things, and also to some extent a training in how to face different problems and how to solve them, you won't get anywhere. So you can try to retrofit a structure of agile way of working as an example, but if the underlying culture isn't there, it will be very, very difficult. Then, of course, you need to have structures and frameworks that sort of reinforce that culture. So if you say that you want one type of behavior, but all of the formal decisions are taken in a very different way, obviously that will then you will not get the culture that you're saying that you're having. So I think they really need to be mutually reinforcing. But I think it's much easier to start with a solid culture and then sort of adapt structures and frameworks on top of that, than to try and implement a structure which isn't really aligned with the underlying culture. Then I think you really need to address that piece first.
Makes sense. So let's go back to Pexip a bit. Obviously, you get this question a lot, I guess, but just to hear from you, the competitive landscape. I mean, they're so easy to compare Pexip to Zoom and then Microsoft Teams and Google Hangouts, etc. How do you sort of paint the picture on the competitive landscape and also the specific niche that Pexip has targeted?
Yeah, I think video conferencing has really exploded since the start of 2020. It's actually difficult to try and explain sort of the massive shift that has happened from a position where video conferencing was, for one, hardly used, and also didn't have that many people believing in it as a concept, to then fast forward 18 months after the pandemic, where it's really become a mainstream tool and become quite commoditized. So that's definitely been a tremendous journey, both for Paxip and the industry. And I think it created both opportunities and challenges for Paxip. So back in 2020, the room for Pexip as a sort of very specialized video tool that really provided this great video experience was certainly there. And we had a lot of customers using Pexip for video, and then in parallel using other tools for their other collaboration needs. Now that video has become so mainstream, and also I would argue that it's become fairly commoditized, then we see that it's being more and more integrated into work streams like Teams, like Google Meet, that sort of fits into the overall productivity bundle. Although you have some examples, as Zoom as an example, that are still then surviving mainly as a video tool. So I think that sort of overall use case of enterprise collaboration has been smaller for Pexip now than it was prior to the pandemic, although the market as a whole has been dramatically larger. The positive for Pexip is that around that, there are a lot of niches that we are really successful in. So one, providing sort of interoperability, so standard-based video conferencing units, the stuff that you find in most boardrooms and enterprise meeting rooms. We are really great at connecting those with the platforms of Microsoft and Google. So being that intermediary that can just ensure that everything keeps working together, and that there's no sort of user that is stuck in this enormous and expensive boardroom and has to join on their laptop, is certainly one of the use cases that now is much more common than it was prior to 2020, and where Paxip is uniquely sort of positioned to deliver on that. The other use case that we see that have really sort of taken off as part of the pandemic is the whole concept around video enablement, or how you meet your doctor using video. When you go to an online store, that you can use video to ask for help from the retail clerk. When you want to meet a bank advisor, and you would earlier go to a retail branch, and now you see more and more of that is happening on video. That's also a segment that Paxip is finding a lot of success in, because we have a platform which is really built to be tailored and built to fit the large enterprises. And there it's much easier for us to use our strengths and the sort of tie into a sort of overall productivity suite where you have document sharing and other workflows is far less in that type of use case.
Very interesting. I mean, doing the research on Pexip, it also stood out to me that flexibility is a big edge, or a big strength. Just on another similar topic in terms of video conferencing, if you look at privacy, I know it's a big topic, but in your mind, how do you break that down, the privacy aspect of delivering a great product?
I think privacy has become more and more top of mind as there's a saying, perhaps mainly in Norway, that data is the new oil, in that it's really a lot of value in your data. And then as an individual or as a business, who has access to that data and what they can use that data for, it becomes more and more important. And so you've seen, especially over the last decade, there are rules in Europe and in the US and in other locations in terms of GDPR and other sort of privacy regulation has really stepped up over the past decade. So I think privacy, just because it guards our data, is super important. Then you have different flavors of privacy. I think there's one that I can trust a organization to keep my data and to use it in a respectful manner. That I think is the baseline for most services, both digital and physical these days. And then you have a different sort of privacy need if you are into more specialized use cases, such as the government wanting to have a top secret conference, the military that wants to have a meeting platform with their soldiers out in the field. That's where sort of the needs around privacy and the needs around having control and security are much higher than in most other use cases.
Being a tech company, do you have sort of like a North Star when it comes to privacy, like a goal you want to reach? Or is it sort of something that just always top of mind and you always have to adjust, think about it? I mean, there is a case where if you go too private, you lose all transparency. And of course, that isn't, or you can argue it's a balance regardless.
No, and I think it is, especially when it comes to user experience, because there's a lot of things that are very simple that comes at the expense of privacy and security. So if you were to have a secret unique password for every sort of video meeting that you were joining, that would be super secure and also quite private, but of course it would be a bit of a challenge to juggle all of those unique passwords. So I think that's truly that is a trade-off that you have to make. And so the trade-off will be different for a meeting sort of within a company where they are most likely able to trust that whoever is providing the service won't misuse that data. And then in situation where privacy and security are sort of much more important, and then you need a different type of trade-off between what you can accept and in terms of user friendliness and security.
Makes sense.
Sorry, you started the question sort of what is our North Star on that, and I think you really have to have privacy and security as part of your overall design. I think it's very, very difficult to try and retrofit security and privacy into a solution and into your overall philosophy. Just as an example, sort of in terms of what data you collect. So there's a lot of data that we could potentially collect from our users that would be useful to have both ourselves for to then do good targeting with ads, etc. And I mean, it could even potentially be a asset that could be interesting to others in the industry. But for us, it's really been a sort of conscious decision to gather as little information as we need to maintain our operations, but to really ensure the privacy and security of our users, which is our top priority. And in that, there are then some trade-offs that if we need to err, we will err on the side of privacy and security, and really make sure that we deliver a great experience on that, and then risk not having all the data that could potentially be useful to us further down the road.
Makes sense. What do you think is the biggest misunderstanding about Pexip? I mean, you meet a lot of clients, you meet a lot of investors. Do you see any like big ones?
I think the main one is sort of how will Pexip compete with Microsoft Teams, or Zoom or WebEx for that matter, where the case is really that we don't really compete with them. So for Paxip, we focus on our three niches within video interoperability and infrastructure. So really connecting other devices into Teams and other platforms, where we have a lot of synergy with Microsoft. The second sort of on critical meetings, which is really about delivering sort of ultra secure platforms, which is a use case that the cloud providers don't really work in. And then thirdly, within the whole space of video enablement, where sort of the ability to be tailored and to really sort of adjust the platform to fit each customer's unique needs is much more important, and where we don't really, where we to some extent meet Microsoft and Zoom as competitors, but also a lot of other types of solutions in that space.
I mean, it's also maybe in this space, it's more about growing the pie as well. So like you said, like this partnership is also about growing the pie. It's not like taking shares from others, always at least.
No, for sure. And I think for us, it's really enabling new opportunities for our customers, which is the main driver. And then, of course, we can also help them save a lot of cost on their existing infrastructure. But there it's typically sort of the traditional vendors such as Cisco, Poly, and others that have that install base that we're going after. It's not really the video meeting platforms that people connect into.
So for the listeners that maybe wants to know more about your clients, I mean, you have some very, very big ones. How would you like to, maybe in terms of explaining the clients, also explain the niche that you have targeted so they can sort of understand why you have those clients and why they have chosen Pexip as well?
No, I think from the start, Pexip has really gone after the large organizations. So the large enterprises and also large public sector organizations. That's really been our target market. And those are also the customers that have need for video infrastructure and that have need for the security and privacy that Pexip can offer. And so, as an example, in the US, we have both 15% of the Fortune 500 companies as customers. Not exclusively. So most of them will also then have Teams or Zoom or other providers in their sort of overall collaboration and video suite, but they will use Pexip in parallel with those to solve some of their use case that they can't really solve with the Teams and the others. Then it's really about, then also into public sector, having customers such as NASA, the US space agency. We're a proud provider of the European Commission. So there's quite a lot of Twitter posts with these large EU meetings where the layout makes it pretty apparent that it's Pexip that is being used. And also the US Army, which is a huge customer of ours.
Can you say like what was the hardest client to land?
I think if you look just now in Q3 of 2021, we landed DISA, which is the US sort of service provider for a lot of the armed forces, both the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, as well as some of the other sort of surrounding agencies and the White House and sort of that arm of government. That was a huge undertaking. So from starting the discussion probably as late as or as early as 2016, with really sort of getting our certification in order to be able to even begin the discussion, to when they first were a customer of ours back in 2019 or 2020, which was about really a substantial customer for Paxip, but that was really a test rig. So they have run a extended POC with us for more than a year, until they are now sort of launching Paxip as their main technology now from September and onwards.
Okay, given that niche, is it also right to say that to land clients takes a longer time because the clients are bigger and maybe have more needs?
No, and I think just this example is definitely the extreme, but it's also probably the most valuable reference customer into that space that anyone can have. So it's definitely an important win for us. I think everyone that is targeting large enterprises, both in video conferencing, but certainly in other spaces as well, know that it takes quite a bit of time to go through the procurement cycle. The benefit is, of course, that that's also an investment on the customer's point of view. So when they then have chosen a provider, they tend to stick around for a long time, and they're also quite large deals once they procure. But you definitely have to be prepared to go through all of the security assessments, discuss the data privacy regulations, and all of the contractual elements to be able to serve these type of customers.
Just a quick question that is maybe a bit technical, but you talk about the distributed architecture. Can you quickly just explain that and why it is valuable for customers, especially in a global context?
Yeah, so I think Paxip really has two core unique sort of technology differentiators. One is transcoding, so the ability to sort of build a video stream and to really translate all of the different dialects of video, which is why we're so great at interoperability, and which is why we're an important partner to Microsoft and Google. The other is our deployment flexibility. So you can run Paxip as a software as a service, and then you don't really care about sort of how it's being done, or you can run it as a software. And when it's run as a software, Paxip is truly distributed, which means that you can host Paxip then on a data center in the US, a data center in Europe, and a data center in Asia Pacific. And you can have meetings at the same time connecting into all of those three hubs, which means that the video experience is really optimal, both for the two people that are joining from the US, the two people that are joining from Europe, and the ones that are joining from Asia. Because if the video has to travel from the US into Asia and back again for the US people to be able to talk to each other, it's not the greatest experience. And being able to then do that within a single conference is very also technology. It's technically hard to do, which means that it's not something that our competitors typically do, and so we're quite unique in being able to deliver that. It also means that it's easy to scale, so that if you were to go from 100 participants and you have that conference run on a single server, and then it goes out of capacity, it's very easy to just expand it into a new server, and the people joining into the meeting won't really feel that that's something taking place. It's just happening back in the backend. So having that sort of engineering edge in the backend to really provide a seamless customer experience is really important to us.
Super interesting. We need to talk a bit about your vision to make virtual meeting better than meeting in person. I mean, it's a great vision, but how do you get there in sort of simple terms, and what's the journey?
I think we're starting to really see that those use cases come alive. So to take an example, if in a few years from now, it will surely be possible for us to speak our own language and have that automatically translated to the others. Which means that if I'm meeting a important Japanese customer, I can speak my native tongue and they can speak their native tongue, which we are in general much more comfortable at doing than trying to discuss things in English, which is probably sort of not a native tongue of neither myself or the one I'm meeting. So having those sort of capabilities means that we can be more comfortable, we can be more open, and then hopefully do better business than we can in a physical meeting, where each of us are basically we're trying to then translate our thinkings in our native tongues into English. Another use case could be that we can, now that AI is starting to pick up also on understanding people's moods, understanding people's health, we can use video to be much more attentive than any human can be. So think of this in a doctor conversation as an example, where you have the ability to both pick up if the person isn't feeling well. You can help pick up their mood, so that you as a doctor can get an early warning if there's something you should probe on, or just get feedback if the patient you're talking to is confused. Having those sort of simple tools can make video be a better meeting experience than if you were meeting in person.
Are you going to build those features, or is it about collaboration, partnerships, etc.?
I think those things are really about collaboration partnerships. So we are now, as an example, working with NVIDIA to use a lot of their AI stack into our meetings, where NVIDIA has built a fantastic technology on AI in the use of video, but it's not super easy to access it because it needs to be run on the NVIDIA sort of graphical processing units. And so it's not something that most softwares can easily use. So the reason why they are excited about working with Paxip is that we can do all of that compute in the cloud, as opposed to relying on doing it on each individual's laptop. So while it's difficult for me to know exactly what type of GPU you have in your computer, I can make sure that I have the right set of hardware in a data center somewhere. So their Paxip can be an important sort of enabler into making those use cases come alive.
So obviously these use cases are generally about machine learning, AI, more data, etc. But if you take the other side, like if you look at VR and AR, do you have any views there, and do you see any synergies? Because obviously, if we're going to be more and more in a virtual world, obviously those can be equipments that can enhance that experience at some point.
No, definitely, and I think the promise of AR in particular, where you even today have the ability to use AR to get a view on the physical world from whatever type of remote location you are in, which is particularly useful. I mean, in oil installations where you would have to travel by helicopter for a few hours to get there. If you can use AR to really sort of examine that physical environment, but using a digital twin, that's obviously useful. And there, Pexip can be a great help in also then introducing video into that stream. As an example, assessing that the actual real world fits with the AR model, and also being in direct contact with the people that are physically there to do repairs, etc. So there we're already seeing AR becoming quite integrated with video conferencing in a lot of interesting use cases.
Will you ever entertain doing something in VR, or is it AR that is the natural partner?
I think for us, we will. It depends really on the use case, and if we see that it's useful. I think for now, it seems like AR is certainly sort of a bit more mature than sort of the full virtual reality experience, although that might shift very, very quickly. And so I think for us, we will definitely not exclude it, but it depends on there being a clear use case that our customers have need for.
Makes sense. Let's talk a bit about the digitalization processes we are seeing right now. Obviously, COVID has accelerated it tremendously, but again, looking sort of it as, give us the broad overview. Do you see any fundamental shifts that will stay forever, or is it hard to say just yet?
I think COVID has really sort of forced us to move a lot of business interactions that we previously thought had to be physical into the digital realm. And I think a bit more high level is that a lot of the digitalization that happened prior to 2020 was really about automating away more lower value interactions, or having the customer do that themselves. So paying your bills online, which has been a very useful thing to be able to do now for a number of years, is really about taking something that isn't that value adding. So going into a bank to do that and doing it digitally, either automatically or myself doing it from my home. What I think COVID forced us to do is to take a lot of the more higher value interactions and to take those also into the digital realm. When we first did our IPO, we started in January in 2020. We of course proposed that we could have a lot of these meetings on video, but that was plain unthinkable to both our banking partners and to the investors, because you're asking someone to trust you to put money into your company. That trust has to be built on in person and can't be done on video. Of course, in March, COVID happened, so it really excluded the opportunity to do this physically. And we proved that it can be done digitally if the technology can enable it. I think we're seeing the same in doctor-patient interactions, where also I really want my doctor to see me as a person. So doing this online by email, as an example, won't give me the confidence that the doctor has truly done a great diagnosis of me. But doing it on video can really help make that possible. And then, of course, at least for me, the benefit of me as a user is that while the 15-minute interaction is as if I was there physically, I save at least an hour traveling back and forth, sitting in the waiting room, where I can actually be at work or be in my home, which is a far sort of better total experience for me than going into the office.
Definitely. Just looking at personal experience, I feel that maybe the hardest part to digitalize is maybe the first meeting. But if you it's of course it depends what the first meeting is all about, right? But certainly the next few meetings seems like it's very obvious that can go digital.
No, I completely agree. I think that's because I don't think video will replace the need to be there physically, but it really sort of at least ensures that the most value of meeting physically is to have that first meeting to build that interaction. And it's also when you have something to celebrate. So in settings where you're really there to build the relationship, you're not just there to exchange information or to do business. Because that is very often as quick to do on video than in person, and you get the same results out of it. I certainly hope that we're not going into a world where everything is on video all the time, but certainly a lot of interactions and a lot of meetings will be far more efficient if it's possible to do them on video, and also far more sustainable. I think the impact of both travel within a city, if you have to go from one location to another, but certainly between cities, if you have to jump on a plane to do a 2-hour meeting, it's a huge waste. And with sustainability and global warming becoming sort of an ever more important topic, I think this is one of the tools at our disposal that can really help us reduce the need for travel and the need for emissions.
Agree. Okay, let's switch gear a bit. We have some questions from Twitter, so I'll read them up and then you can answer long or short, whatever you want. So what is the most common reason when customers churn, or say it in a more easy way, stop using Paxip?
Yeah, I think one of the reasons that we have seen is as I alluded to earlier in our discussion on that customers are consolidating onto some large industry platforms. I think we are definitely seeing network effects on Teams, to some extent on Zoom, on WebEx and Gmeet. Luckily for Paxip, that has not been a major part of our growth over the past 2 years either. So for us, it's a relatively smaller piece of our business, but it's certainly an area where we're seeing more churn than in the use cases where we are unique. And I think that's a fairly general point in a lot of software, is that in the areas where you can be unique and where you can sort of at least either be the best one in the world, or at least aspire to be one of the best, you are much more competitive than in areas where you are simply one of many. I think for Paxip, the other big driver that we see is that we have much higher churn amongst customers that are small with Paxip, because those are either customers that are using multiple platforms at the same time, and so it's more likely that they can opt to another platform. And then some of them will opt for Paxip and then become a larger customer over time. And also, I think our whole value proposition, go-to-market, and business processes are really geared towards being great with the large enterprises. It's not really neither a technology or a sales motion which is really adapted to small and medium businesses.
Next one is very specific, but I'll try it. How many % of new sales staff is still working at Pexip after 12 months?
Ooh, great question. I think if I look at, bit of the backstory is that since the IPO, we have really hired a lot of people, especially in sales marketing, to supercharge our growth. For us, that was the core premise of the IPO, was to take the unit economics and the sort of business model that we had validated and really scale that up faster than what we could do on our own cash flow. So we've hired a lot of people over the past 18 months. If you look at the team that was here, that we hired in 2020, I think in sales and marketing, in total, roughly 15% or so are still have now left the company. Which is in part then people leaving on their own accord, but it's also then individuals that weren't really a great match with Paxip, and where we've found a sort of a common decision that it's better for them to seek opportunities elsewhere.
How do you find that balance when you're, I don't know if blitzscaling is the right word, but aggressive growth? How do you find that balance between the churn of the employees as well? Because there has to be a balance there. I mean, you can't go all the way on one side.
No, for sure. And I think when you're really scaling fast, it's the recruiting process is probably even more important than when you're scaling at a more moderate pace. Because at the end of the day, you really need those people that come in that to be really great, because you don't have the same level of both an experienced team that can help onboard them, nor a manager that is probably needs to sort of scale up several new hires as opposed to just one. So I think that's the hiring process is really super important in that type of phase, because you need to find great individuals. Then you will from time to time miss. I think it's important to recognize that regardless of how great your sales process is and your recruiting process, there will from time to time be people that aren't that aligned with the organization. And then having the ability to detect that early on and to find good solutions is important. Because in the end, I think both Paxip as a company and individuals that aren't that good of a match, we will both benefit from discovering that early on in the process as opposed to later on.
It makes sense. Next question is sort of a follow-up question, but it's about when are you seeing that the sales capacity is fully up and running to the desired capacity?
So I think for us, we see that it takes, we've said in the past that it takes between 9 and 12 months from when you join Paxip to when we're seeing sales results at the level that we would expect. In those 9 to 12 months, a lot of the work is around building pipeline. It's around being both learning the product and then starting to work those opportunities from start to close. And as we touched on earlier, that's especially in large enterprise, is a process that takes a bit of time. I think we're seeing now that it takes closer to 12 months and probably somewhat above that as well, which I think is in part a consequence of us scaling at a much higher pace. So I think part of that responsibility is on us to give them the necessary support, but it's also I think a trait of sort of the society in general now with the pandemic, where doing business takes a bit longer, both for customers to decide and to implement the solutions that they choose.
The next one is about the cloud video interoperability. Will it still be as important in 5 years' time? Is maybe a more strategic question.
Yeah. So I think that's a very interesting question, and I think for the since Paxip really started with interoperability, it's always been a question. So surely this can't be a solution 5 years down the road. And then now, close to 10 years later, it's actually even more important than it was in the past. So while I think that the exact use case that we're solving now, so standard-based video rooms into Microsoft Teams as a platform, that use case is probably less relevant in 5 years from now than it is now. But by then, I think there will be other platforms and other use cases that really need that type of interoperability. Because what we're seeing is that both the level of innovation within the different video platforms has never been higher than it is now. And they are sort of intrinsically motivated to not work that well with each other, because at the end of the day, it's more important to create stickiness and reasons for the customer to stay within your ecosystem than to really work well with other ecosystems. And that is one of the, talking about sustainability. That's really one of the areas where Pexip finds a lot of value, because we are also humble enough to realize the practical difficulties that a lot of our customers face, and good enough to find good technology solutions to those problems.
Just the last one. Maybe it sounds a bit brutal, but I think it's interesting regardless. Just I think the question was, why can't Apple just buy Paxip or the same capabilities if they wanted to? But that's maybe talking a bit also about the competitive landscape and the big players and Paxip being a smaller player, etc. But
yeah, I think while in theory anything in software can be done if you throw enough people and money at it, what is truly unique about Paxip is our ability to be delivered both as a software service, but also as a dedicated software, which requires a completely different type of development methodology than if you're developing a cloud service. So while you, with a cloud service, can iterate on something as you go, and if you detect problems, you can fix them in your backend, and that fix will be available to customers the next day. If you develop a software package, you really need to make a product that can live on for years without anyone touching it. And I think that development methodology, together with one of the most extreme test regimes that you will find in the software industry, is the reason why Paxip is so successful in serving the large enterprises with a dedicated software. So that part, I think, is very difficult to retrofit, and it's difficult to take a cloud service and then try and repackage it into a software that you can send off. The other unique part of Paxip is really the aspect around transcoding. So taking in different types of media streams, repackage those so that each individual can receive something that they understand, because the dialects of video are slightly different if you're using Zoom or Teams or a video system. And there, Pexip is really, really good. So having that ability to do transcoding without meaningful latency, which also means that you can add in a lot of AI things in the cloud as opposed to doing it on the laptop, is really, really hard. So it's really sort of hardcore engineering and a lot of mathematics that have gone into building that algorithm. And while it's, I will not say that it's impossible for others to do, there is a reason why companies such as Google or Microsoft have come to the conclusion that it's better to partner with Paxip than to try to develop this themselves. And that also speaks that it's to the fact that it's not a certainly not a trivial sort of technology feature to add.
Good points. Just some closing remarks. If we again go a bit more broadly, not just looking at Pexip, but more in general, what do you think is necessary in order to have success as a software company scaling internationally, either from Norway, Sweden, or Denmark?
I think what has been crucial for Pexip is a starting position with fantastic people. At the end, that's really what you need to have. And it's so important because things will change sooner than you realize, and as such, it's you need people that can adjust and pivot based on that. I also think that a strong network that you can hire from, and also experience in a lot of the challenges that you are going to face is super important. For Paxip, coming out of Tamberg, that was a crucial sort of part of our success, because we knew a lot of the both potential business partners in the industry and also some of the best people to hire in that early stage, which is particularly important when you're scaling internationally. Because while you can have a good network within Norway, as an example, to find that one individual that can take you to success in the US is super, super hard to do. And it's important to not underestimate that challenge of finding great people. And I think the other part that is absolutely essential is that in almost all cases, you will scale from a small base, meaning that you can't do everything yourself. So developing good partnerships and also knowing sort of what is your uniqueness and focus your development on that. And what is really things that you need to do, but that others are better at, so that you can buy sort of off-the-shelf software for that is super important. So staying focused really matters.
Just a last question. There's a lot of bright people watching this show wanting to have an exciting career. Do you have any final advice for people that are maybe starting out in their career or want to have a change in their career? Like, obviously, you sort of taking the opportunities and you have had a very interesting story so far, but is there any advice you can give to other people as well?
I think where my success has come from is to take the opportunities that have arisen. So be confident enough to take risk, so that and know sort of what type of experience that you're looking for, because at the end that will be much more important than call it retaining a exciting sounding job title if it's not really giving you the experiences that you need. So be confident enough to take risks and to accept opportunities when they are offered, and also have a clear view of what type of experience that you want to add to your portfolio of experiences. I think have been useful tools for me, at least.
Great ending. Øystein, thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you so much, Christopher.
Hi everyone, Christopher here again. Just a few things before you leave the show. If you like this episode, it would be great if you could give it a review and also share it with your professional network. If you want to get in touch with me, Twitter is the place. Just go to @ChrisVonheim. You can also find this information in the show notes. Hope to see you tune in to the next episode, and take care.